This is Fight Fans Radio.
Let's get ready to rumble! Oh, my God! Unbelievable! Down goes Frazier! Down goes
Frazier! It's time! You're listening to New Mexico's only mixed martial arts and boxing podcast, The Low Blow, on AtomCombatSports.com and Fight Fans Radio. It is episode 172 of The Low Blow on Fight Fans Radio, SouthwestFight.com, and USCombatSports.com. I am Justin Goodham, joined by Jorge Hernandez. Welcome back. Happy holidays, Jorge. Can you hear me, Jorge? Looks like we're still trying to get Jorge on the line here. There's some Skype technical difficulties. On today's show, if we can get Jorge on the air here.
I'm here, Jay.
Okay, I thought you vanished. You got to come on the show. You've been gone for 2 weeks, man.
I know, right, man? I was just holding out for a while. I want another vacation already.
You did. What's up, man? Welcome back.
Oh, thank you, man. It's good to be back. It was a long 2-week hiatus, but a lot of fun in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we have lots to talk about. On today's show, we're going to discuss your trip to Brooklyn, and we're going to discuss all the fallout. Erislandy Lara defeating Austin Trout. We're going to discuss, our guest a couple of weeks ago, Sean Porter, becoming the IBF welterweight champion. We're going to discuss Paulie Malignaggi's victory over Zab Judah. We're going to talk Holly Holm, George St. Pierre, and preview UFC 168. But before we get to all that, as always, you can get in touch with Fight Fans Radio through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Spreaker. We're always live on Spreaker each and every week, along with our show and the rest of the Fight Fans Radio family. Also, we're on Facebook at The Low Blow Podcast. Also on Twitter to @The Low Blow. Also, our YouTube page, which has all of the video interviews. Jorge did an awesome job getting all the interviews with, Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, the press conference, post, and pre-press conferences. All that's on our YouTube page at LowBlow505. Just type that into the search, or URL is youtube.com/LowBlow505. So before we get to your trip, Jorge, you had a little bit of news you wanted to break first.
Yeah, as far as, I'm not sure what you're talking about, Jay. I'm not going to lie.
Okay. And let's go on. Let's move on to your trip then, man. Well, let's talk. Let's talk about Austin Trout trying to rebound from his loss against Canelo Alvarez earlier this year. This is something you should talk about because you were there. Erislandy Lara pretty much outboxed Austin Trout. The scores for 118, 109, 117, 110, 117, 110. This was about a couple of weeks ago. Bad left hook had it for 119, 108 for Lara. Pretty much Lara outboxed Austin Trout in a very unexciting performance. He knocked down Trout in the 11th round. Can you talk about, I was reading your tweets on Twitter just about how, Trout had a very small contingent of fans, but they're pretty rowdy. Describe the atmosphere. Describe those fans that were there supporting Trout, just watching him pretty much be outboxed by Lara.
You had a lot of New Mexicans that made the trip and were ringside for this fight, despite the fact that it wasn't a main event or co-main event. I mean, obviously for them, it was the main event. As far as a lot of hardcore boxing fans, they were, out of all the fights they saw on this card, they felt that this would be the best one or the most compelling, but it was the complete opposite. It was the biggest mismatch after seeing it. On paper, it was even, but afterward, it was a complete rout by Erislandy Lara. The two guys, when you put them against one another, in front of one another, Lara looked like a welterweight. Austin Trout looked like the 154-pounder. You would think that these guys were a weight class and a half away from each other. And the speed advantage was clearly on Erislandy Lara's side. Both guys waited to counter one another. We knew this. They're both counterpunchers. But Trout was the one that tried to initiate the action. And it was Erislandy Lara that did a beautiful job countering anything Austin Trout threw at him. And, I may have given 1 or 2 rounds to Trout. I had it the same as most of the people that are ringside and most people actually viewing it. So as far as a New Mexico standpoint, this was a very disappointing, a huge blow. Who knows the next time we'll see Trout fight for a world championship? It might not be 2-3 fights down the line if we ever get to see him in that position again.
I know fighters are pretty, distraught and disappointed after a loss. Were you able to talk to Austin Trout since then, get a vibe of how he's feeling?
Well, I mean, I actually went to the back a few minutes after his fight, and they took him to the hospital. Apparently, he wasn't feeling well. The New York Commission insisted that he go to the hospital, and he was taken back to a local New York hospital where CAT scans and everything was actually ran on him. Everything came out clean. So, I mean, he's healthy. He does not receive a medical suspension. So he can be back in there within the next 2 to 3 months. If we'll see him then, who knows? I think a bounce back fight in El Paso or even in Las Cruces is in his near future, however.
I think that's a wonderful idea. And maybe even fighting in Albuquerque, too. I mean, it'd be a great idea to have here. If you bring an ESPN Friday night fights here or something like that, it'd be a great idea to get Austin on one of those, and it should do a pretty good job. I mean, the last ESPN Friday night fights here wasn't amazing. It had about 2,000 people, so there's no reason that Austin on his own you put a good local undercard on there, and you get 3,000-4,000 people to show up to this thing here. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Can you discuss the main event before we get to Sean Porter? These guys, I think it was you that posted the picture of the Barclays Center giving them a belt of the champion of Brooklyn. Was that right?
Yeah.
The Barclays Center?
I mean, it's not something that Boxing Commission. It was actually the corporate offices there at the Barclays Center, which is an amazing venue, by the way. I mean, highly suggested to check out an event if you're in New York. But they put that together and they called the title the World Champion of Brooklyn. So, just a little gimmick to throw in there. And again, it's not a boxing organization gimmick. It was the gimmick that was pulled by the owners of the Barclays Center. So don't get it twisted. We have way too many belts as it is, man.
Can you kind of walk us through this fight? And another lopsided victory for Paulie Malignaggi. Again, the scores were 116, 117, 117. Excuse me, 116, 111, 117, 110, and 117, 110. Bad left hook. Had it 119, 109. It seemed like Zab Judah was kind of gun shy. There was even some testier moments within the fight. What does this fight even mean for Paulie at all? I mean, he's on the commentary side. During this fight, he's beating down Zab Judah. The next week, he's criticizing Adrian Broner. I mean, Paulie Malignaggi is 33. Does he even have a future as one of the top fighters in boxing, or is this pretty much where he's going to take the big name fights and pretty much focus on his commentating career?
It's going to be. I mean, this is where it gets very interesting for Paulie. The only reason he's been in the position that he's been in the last 3 fights is because he beat Shinchenko in the Ukraine. He stopped him. No one expected for him to do that, to go and knock someone out. Let's not forget, Paulie Malignaggi has an 18% KO percentage. So for him to go to the Ukraine, out of all places, to beat a Ukrainian there and stop him, that opened a lot of eyes. Then, he was awarded a split decision against Cano. He gave Adrian Broner hell in their fight. And, that's why he's in the position that he is now. It's because he's, 1, done the impossible of going to the Ukraine, and then 2, he gave Adrian Broner, who at the time, obviously before this past weekend, was viewed as the next big star in boxing. What happens next? There's a lot of fights. I'd like to see him and Robert Guerrero fight. Why the hell not?
Yeah, that's would be an entertaining fight, absolutely.
Neither guy is champion. Another guy that you have on there is, Marcos Maidana. Maybe they want to give Maidana another guy, but there's no reason for Maidana to fight him. Sean Porter, maybe, if Sean Porter wants another name on his belt. And here's the thing. A few fights ago, I can't remember when it was, Keith Thurman was at the press conference, after his fight, talking to the media. He randomly called out Paulie Malignaggi, who was sitting there in the crowd. I think they can make that one. They can make Keith Thurman against Paulie Malignaggi. I think Thurman would stop him. But, I mean, these guys have some sort of beef. They're both Showtime fighters. I'd like to see Malignaggi against Thurman or against Robert Guerrero. I think of the two, because he's coming off a win. I think it's going to be Keith Thurman, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. You brought up Sean Porter. He's clearly the underdog against Devin Alexander. No one really giving him a chance, but he pulled out the unanimous decision, 115-113, 116-112, 116-112. Bad left hook had it 116-112 for Sean Porter. It seemed like in the beginning, Devin Alexander had the advantage, but Porter stuck with it and ultimately won a decision to become the IBF welterweight champion. What did you think of Sean Porter's performance? He moved to 23-0 and with one draw, 14 KO. Do you think we have another player in the welterweight division, or do you think despite winning this fight, Porter still has some more tests ahead of him to really consider him, the elite of that division?
I think he has a few more tests ahead of him. Let's not forget, Devin Alexander was awarded a split decision against Lucas Matisse back in 2011, which I don't think he deserved. He was awarded a split decision in 2010 against Andrei Kotelnik, which I didn't think he deserved. So right now, as far as I'm concerned, he should be 23-4 instead of 25-2. So Devin Alexander shows he is a player in that division. So for Sean Porter to defeat him, was it a huge win for him? I think so. Was it a huge win in the overall picture? I don't think so, just because of those two facts, is that Devin Alexander should probably have 2 more losses on his record than he actually does. But guess what? Sean Porter has the IBF title. I'd love to see him. Here's the thing. It's very difficult in the division that they're in right now, just because Tim Bradley, Juan Manuel Marquez, and Manny Pacquiao are the top 3 guys in the division. Floyd Mayweather, we got to decide what weight class he's fighting at. He'd be another player in that game. But as far as that, those fighters that I mentioned before that, those are all HBO fighters. So it'll be very difficult for for Sean Porter to fight any one of them. Him and Maidana would be a fun fight. Him and Guerrero would be a fun fight. And him and Keith Thurman would be a phenomenal fight. As far as any guy right now without a title, and meaning Guerrero and Keith Thurman, I guess he technically does have a title, it'd be fun to watch. Sean Porter has an exciting style, I think. Just because he goes in there, it's kind of wild if you think about it, Jay, the way he just goes in there like a bull, but it's effective. A lot of guys who are undersized like him, that type of style is effective. So the welterweight division has a lot of hard hitters, and no matter who you match up, and I think Golden Boy learned this last year, Canelo lost because they tested him. Adrian Broner lost because they tested him. And guess what? Boxing's popularity has grown tremendously here in 2013 because of it.
I agree with you, man. It's been an unbelievable year for boxing.
Kind of went off. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. I don't blame you. I mean, it's been a great year for boxing in 2013, and something I'm sure we'll discuss in more detail of our year in review show coming fairly soon. But since we've been kind of gone in terms of us doing the show together, there's been plenty of news. So I want to get to George St. Pierre taking his hiatus from mixed martial arts. You pretty much have heard the story, so I'm not going to run down the timeline. But I just want to get your thoughts, Jorge, on really George St. Pierre's mindset. Because if you listen to the conference call, I mean, you feel 2 ways. One, you feel that he deserves to make his own decision. George St. Pierre is probably the most accomplished champion in the history of the UFC, not named Anderson Silva. I mean, he's beat everybody under the sun. At the same time, his reasoning for kind of taking this break has been, all the criticism from the media, all the criticism from the fans, increased scrutiny within his own country in Canada. And it kind of, I don't know. Because one side of me is like, okay, George St. Pierre deserves to take this break. He could do whatever he wants. At the same time, I can't help feeling like if he's the top of this sport and he no doubt wants to be making the money, being the champion. George St. Pierre likes the women. You see him in the nightclubs. I mean, George St. Pierre's he's not staying at home just chilling in his house when he's not fighting. This guy loves the limelight, even though he's humble. I can't help but, I don't really feel sorry for him. I mean, I don't buy this sob story. It came off as like we're supposed to feel sorry for him. And I really don't. You know what I mean? It's like we don't really know his personal problems. All the rumors concerning, him having a child, his father, those are all rumors at this point. I don't know. Am I making any sense, Jorge? Like, I feel like he deserves to make this decision. I'm not criticizing him for walking away. At the same time, I don't really feel sorry for him. Like, I don't feel like he's going through this great struggle in terms of him being a champion.
No, and I don't think so either. And you mentioned it as well. I mean, he's in a way living a playboyish lifestyle, and despite the fact that that he says that he's having these problems, this guy's out having a good time still, enjoying life, and that's what that's what he wants to do. The last, his fight against Johnny Hendricks, he took a pounding, and also his fight against Carlos Condit. Despite the fact that he won a unanimous decision, he got the hell beat out of him, or he looked like he got the hell beat out of him. We know Condit landed one good shot at him that almost put him out. But, I mean, just those two fights alone, I mean, maybe he feels that, he's lost something. Maybe just the beatings aren't worth it. Maybe the criticism of him, people saying that he's a boring fighter, has finally gotten to him, and he's just like, he's just telling the rest of the MMA world, well, then screw you guys, I'm taking this break. So, I mean, he deserves it. If he wants to take a break, by all means, why not? I mean, he's a human being. I'm sure he has a contract with the UFC, so he can come back whenever he wants. I'm sure, someone, especially in something like this, Jay, you don't have to show up Monday at 8 a.m. to clock in something like this. People forget about that. He doesn't know us anything. He could retire now and live fine for the rest of his life. He does it because of the passion. He does it for the fans, and for us criticizing or people, I have no reason to criticize them. I don't think. I mean, it's ridiculous, personally. I think for people to be doing that. I
agree, and I personally, all this kind of attention he's gotten prior to UFC, I believe 167, I believe it was his camp's fault. I don't understand why they're putting out these rumors of George St. Pierre retiring, why they're saying that he's going to take a break from the sport. That really put a lot of unfair pressure on George St. Pierre when he's facing Johnny Hendricks, and shame on him. And that includes his coach, his friends. I mean, it's like, how would you feel if you had something personal within your life and they just blast it out for everybody to hear when you haven't made a decision yet? I mean, what kind of friends are they? I mean, you're supposed to be your personal confidants, your friends, and they kind of betray your trust. And I just think that's pretty terrible of them to do that. I want to ask you, Jorge, I mean, is it possible for George St. Pierre to be done here? Do you think he never returns to the sport at all? Or do you think, he takes a more of a Floyd Mayweather approach and only fights 2 times a year? Because ever since his ACL tear, he's fought 3 times. Condit, Diaz, and Johnny Hendricks, as you mentioned earlier. That's a murderer's row. In my opinion, the 3 most toughest guys he's ever faced. Do you see him just taking more of a boxing approach, just fighting 2 times a year?
I think so. If you were to ask me to place a bet on one side or the other, I think he's coming back. He's going to take the Mayweather approach to where he fights 1 or 2 times, and the money he generates. I think I saw a statistics where something the UFC does a certain amount. I believe it was like 200,000 more pay-per-views than the average when he's on the card. I mean, I'm not sure how good those numbers are, but I think it was a Bleacher Report if someone put it out. I mean, Bleacher Report is also not the best place for information, I may add. But nonetheless, I mean, what he does to the MMA community, I think it's similar to what, in comparison, what Mayweather does as far as the popularity. I mean, him, Jones, Velasquez, those 3 guys do a lot for the sport, and just the attention that they garner because of their skill. It's vital. A guy like George St. Pierre, if he were to retire, it's going to hurt the sport. It's going to hurt the UFC. But I think we'll see him sometime back in the middle or the end of next year, to be honest.
I agree with you. I think you'll hear an announcement within the summertime of George St. Pierre returning, and I think he'll fight in November.
And you know what? And if they have it out in Canada, they might do it in a huge venue, and it's going to be a big freaking deal when he does come back. You'll see another 45,000 people when he makes his announcement that he's returning. So in the end, I guess marketing-wise, it's going to be a good idea if they do something like that.
I agree with you. This whole situation, of course, another perspective is how this hurts the UFC. Certainly, in terms of the welterweight division, there's so many talented guys. I don't think it's going to hurt the welterweight division in terms of it being entertaining. Of course, you lose the biggest draw. I want to talk about Carlos Condit. This affects Carlos big time. He's supposed to fight Matt Brown on the UFC on Fox card. Shout out to Demetrius Johnson, by the way, an unbelievable knockout, Joseph Benavidez. But with Carlos, he was supposed to be on that card. Matt Brown gets hurt with the herniated disc. Carlos Condit's left without an opponent. Now he's going to face Tyron Woodley. Funny enough, Dana White said Tyron Woodley wasn't even ranked in the welterweight division. And then a couple of days later, you see Tyron fighting Carlos Condit. What do you think about this fight? I like this fight a lot. I think it could be fairly entertaining. And I think this would be a true test of where Woodley really is in the welterweight division.
Oh, it's a huge test. I've been a Woodley fan for a while now, and when this fight was announced for Condit, I like the matchup, but I don't like the matchup for Carlos Condit, because if Woodley is able to take this to the ground, we see that that's where Condit, does struggle a lot. When's the last time we've seen Carlos Condit win by a submission, man? It's been, if I'm not mistaken, it's been years, right?
It's been a while. We've seen him come. The thing about Carlos Condit and what I like about him the most is that he's always he never gets dejected in a fight, ever.
No, never.
You won't see him just mail it in and around and just concede to the other guy. And we've seen him be dominated kind of on the ground against Rory McDonald, Jake Ellenberger, and him come out on top. So even if Woodley does take him to the ground, I'd be shocked if he finishes him. Even with Johnny Hendricks. You saw Carlos Condit pop right back up. It wasn't like you saw Hendricks dismounting him and dominating him on the ground for a certain amount of time. So I'm not really concerned about the wrestling aspect, because to me, Carlos Condit just throws too much volume compared to Woodley, in my opinion.
Here it is, Jay. This might blow you away. The last submission win by Carlos Condit, let's not forget, 45% of his victories, again, 45%, which is a pretty decent number, of his 29 victories have been by submission. His last submission took place WEC 32, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Carlo Brader, the submission guillotine.
Wow.
It's been since 2008 since he last won by submission.
Wow, that's pretty surprising.
I do not, just looking at that statistic, I do not like this fight for him.
We'll see. I'm intrigued by the matchup. But your concerns, I think, are very warranted. I want to move on real quickly, and another news story that kind of broke. We haven't been able to discuss this yet. We did have this kind of discussion with Van Tate. He is the sports director of Albuquerque's television station KRQE 13. We had about a 25-minute discussion with him. He's the sports director about everything New Mexico related within combat sports. We discussed Holly Holm. We discussed Carlos Condit, Austin Trout, even a funny story about Michael Jordan. And that podcast is already up on Stitcher, so please go check that out. And I think that's also available on Fight Fans Radio. I'm not sure, but please go check out that discussion. We also discussed a lot about Bob Foster. But I want to talk to you about Holly Holm. Her name has come up within the news within the last couple of days pertaining to Ronda Rousey. We all know about Holly Holm's last victory, defeating Angela Hayes pretty dominantly. At the post-fight press conference, we've talked about Lenny Fresquez before. Now he wants a 5-figure deal for Holly Holm. I feel two ways about this. We're kind of biased, Jorge. We've watched her entire career. She went to Manzano High School. We're pretty biased in supporting her. And I think we both agree she deserves the money. At the same time, I can't see Dana White agreeing to this, a 5-figure deal for an unproven commodity in Holm. In women's boxing, she didn't fight on pay-per-view. She didn't even fight out of Albuquerque too many times at all. And when she fought here, it wasn't like she drew a big number in the pit. She didn't even fight in Tingley Coliseum for a long time. She had that contract with Tingley Coliseum here she had that contract with Route 66 Casino just outside of Albuquerque. So do you even see Dana White even signing Holly Holm to this contract? This seems insane. A 6-figure deal. There's not even, honestly, a male fighter that's worth that much unless you're named Floyd Mayweather. What do you make of this whole situation in terms of, Fresquez making a power play with the UFC? I thought she had 2 more fights left on her legacy deal, and all of a sudden now she's fighting in this, I don't want to be harsh here, but I will, this make-believe title fight in March What do you make of this whole situation?
I don't know, man. It's quite crazy. I mean, the contract she has with Legacy is non-exclusive, which means she can fight outside of her contract.
Sure.
But as far as, the six figures, $100,000 for her to be able to receive that. I mean, I haven't watched the interview that Sherdog had with Lenny Fresquez, her promoter. I'm not sure if they said, six-figure deal, maybe a 3-fight contract. And I doubt it, just because she probably makes anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 every time she fights here in Albuquerque. But
exactly. Yeah.
To put it into perspective, and I have an article up on swfight.com where I mentioned this. In February, in her last bout this past February, Ronda Rousey against Liz Carmouche at UFC 157, I believe it was. Rousey got $90,000, which included $45,000 for the victory, which means she was paid $45,000 to show by the UFC. Carmouche, how much do you think she got? I'll give you a figure, Jay. Was it over or under $15,000?
Oh, it was under. I know that.
It was $12,000 that Liz Carmouche got for that fight, man. So for Holly to be demanding this, and it's possible if anyone should be demanding something like that, I mean, it could be her based off of the reputation she has, but does she deserve it? That's completely something else, man. I think the UFC is going to try to lowball them and say, we'll give you 70 or 80, but 100,000, I just don't see how they do that unless it's absolutely demanded. And as far as Rousey, man, when Kat comes back, I don't know if she could even beat Kat. It's going to be tough for Ronda Rousey to remain undefeated for the next year, I think.
I think it's fairly interesting, Jorge. It's this whole women's MMA, the climate is just in a weird position, right? Because the strawweights, I mean, look at the UFC. They took that entire division, and now they're going to be on the Ultimate Fighter. You see Miriam Nakamoto, who have been pushing. She tears her ACL. There's rumors of her entering the UFC. Instead, she loses to Lauren Murphy after she destroys her knee at the last Invicta card. Speaking of Invicta, I guess, with all the struggles they've had, I'm sure they're not the richest promotion. I don't know if they even can afford Holly Holm. And I think that would be the right place for Holly Holm. I think if you take Dana White's perspective, I mean, he trusts Invicta's judgment. If Holly Holm's avoiding fighting those fighters in Invicta, I mean, look at her record. I mean, who has she fought? No one. I mean, and she's going to be in this title fight that makes zero sense. I mean, it's just, I'm like totally against this title fight. At least, I don't even know what organization. I guess it's going to be Havoc, the local promotion she fought last time, I guess. I mean, I'm just not really too sure what her strategy is with her career. I mean, this is not like boxing in which you can just attract fans. And I think the goal of this, in my opinion, of Holm was to get more notoriety and more recognition of her work in the combat sports field. And I think she was feeling that was lacking in boxing. But playing this kind of game plan, this kind of game of chicken with the UFC, she's going to lose. Dana White wins in all the negotiations. You saw that with Ben Askren. If you don't want to play with the UFC, they do not mind not signing you at all.
No, and also, I mean, and he doesn't deal with promoters. You know what I mean? He knows the background. He's not going to let anyone just come in there and punk him, Jay.
No way.
This is going to be a very difficult thing, and I don't know, man. I can see a situation where Holly Holm might not even ever fight in the UFC. It's just so this situation is just so out there, so strange because we've never seen it done before. Where they say, "All right, I'll fight, but you got to give me this." But here's the thing. I mean, we saw the video that came out yesterday on Fight Hub where, Ronda Rousey said that she would love to fight Holly Holm.
Correct.
And let's not forget, I mean, Holly Holm might have an ally, as weird as it sounds, in Ronda Rousey if Rousey pushes Dana White to actually sign her. So, I mean, there's a Rousey factor involved as well as far as her pushing Dana to be able to sign her.
That's a good point. And, the money situation, I mean, take a look at that video and take a look at her house. I believe that's the same house she had prior to all of her fame. I mean, now you think she'd be one of the highest paid figures in all MMA. It's not like she's living in a mansion. So if Ronda Rousey, who's way more popular than Holly Holm is, has way more notoriety, who's in 2 more movies, I mean, I'm sure she's not going to be living in a house just because, she's going to be involved in 2 of the biggest movie franchises in 2014. But to me, compare her to, there's no comparison in terms of the draw of Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey. Now, as a fighter, that's different. But in terms of who deserves more, it says there's no contest. So I just don't like the strategy, man. I'm feeling fairly nervous about her future just with signing with the UFC. I agree. I think it's fairly possible that you may not see Holly Holm step into the octagon, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's pretty tough, man. It's going. This year is going to do a lot to Holly Holm's career. If we don't see her in the UFC by the end of this year, or at least discussions where Dana White's actually talking seriously about her, I don't know if 2015 will be the year. But I hate to say it's now or never for Holm, but if we don't see anything after 2014, it's going to get to that point.
You can't play this game of just, I want more money with the UFC. You've seen that with every single guy, and they all lose. Dana White's undefeated. He's the champion. Dana White's so stubborn that he'll just not sign the person just to spite the other guy. That's how stubborn he is. And so I just don't like the situation. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. I want to discuss Adrian Broner. Malignaggi, his comment was, there's only one Floyd Mayweather, and when you try to be Floyd Mayweather, it doesn't always work out. Adrian Broner dominated by Marcos Maidana. The rating for Showtime Boxing was a huge 1.3 rating, the third highest rating of the network since they began keeping track of individual fights in 2009. That's via Bad Left Hook. This Maidana just bullied Broner. It just seemed like one of those things in which, kind of similarly to Anderson Silva or to George St. Pierre when he fought Matt Serra, to which a guy wasn't impressed with the aura of the higher hyped fighter, and really Maidana just took it to him. I do give Broner credit with his chin. Even though he was knocked down, I believe 2 times or 3 times, he wasn't finished. I was fairly impressed with Broner's heart because he easily could have quit because Maidana was dominating him. I guess let's talk about Adrian Broner first. Are you impressed at least with his heart and his willingness to at least stay in the fight?
I am, and people saw it as a complete domination, but Broner was landing some shots on Maidana as well. It's not like Marcos Maidana he was walking through him for most of the fights, but when he was able to land, he'd stop Maidana in his tracks. I had the fight 115-110, I believe, similarly to one of the judges. But 117-109, the New Mexico judge actually had. I thought that was a little bit wide. I thought the fight was a little more competitive. As far as the rating that this drew, it's a couple of reasons. People know that Marco Maidana is a fighter. The 3 losses that he has, he had one against Andrei Kotelnik, who I mentioned was a hell of a fighter. He's not very active lately, but he lost a split decision to him. He lost to Amir Khan in one of the better fights of 2010, man. He had Khan hurt in, I believe, was the 10th or 11th round, really bad to where he almost stopped him. And then he lost a huge landslide to Devin Alexander. So the guys that he's fought, he stopped Josecito Lopez. He gave Jesus Soto Carras hell. Marcos Maidana is a tough guy, and everyone knows him. And here's the thing about boxing. The Latino community is huge when it comes to following boxing. And anytime you have a Latino fighter going up against a loudmouth fighter like Adrian Broner, they're going to flock to it just to see the talker lose. That's why so many people tune in, especially from the Latin community, to see Floyd Mayweather, because they want to see him lose so badly. It's just unbelievable. This fight reminded me of Marcos Barrera against Prince Nassim Hamed. Hamed came undefeated, highly touted, but here's the difference between Broner and Hamed. Hamed earned his popularity, one, because he was cocky, but others because he fought tough guys to get to Barrera, and Barrera put a working on Hamed that night, and it was very similar to this fight. We'll have to post that on our Facebook page, that old Barrera and Hamed, because it was a great atmosphere for that fight. But nonetheless, Maidana, he didn't have to beat the shoulder roll because Broner couldn't establish his defense because of the onslaught. And I knew Maidana would be able to give Broner problems. Roy Jones Jr. has said it time and time again. They've asked him, Max Kellerman has asked him, how do you beat the shoulder roll? you hit the top of the head. And that's what Maidana did to Broner every single time.
It just seemed like Maidana just bullied Broner, and it seemed like Broner was pretty surprised. I think Bernard Hopkins criticized Broner for leaving the ring after the decision was read. Did you have a problem with that? I mean, I believe he was in there until everything was done. The post-fight interview began with Maidana and Broner left. I don't see anything wrong with that. What was your opinion on that?
I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, it's the same reason, like right now, what's the big thing in the NFL? Everyone's talking smack because they feel, that Des Bryant should have not left the sideline. I mean, come on.
There's time left on the clock.
No, it doesn't matter. They lost. They lost. The game was over. There's no reason to stay, and especially if you're so frustrated. When it comes to Broner, however, you just don't know what was happening to him. The guy may have had a concussion. He looked completely disoriented, Jay, when they were walking him back to the locker room. As far as when it comes to fights, I'll give you Des. All right. I mean, maybe he shouldn't have left. But when it comes to fights, if you were in a war the way Broner and Maidana were in, you should see a doctor or get back to your locker room here as soon as possible. You just went through a tough battle. So I have nothing against Broner. But, I'm one of the few people that actually like Adrian Broner and believe that we need these types of fighters in the sport of boxing just, to create some sort of hype.
Yeah, you know me. I'm all for the show. I was just talking with some other people, and he had the sizzle, and, he wasn't he didn't give us the steak in a sort of sense, he didn't give us the substance. But I still think that Broner has a lot of value in the sport. Do you see an automatic rematch coming immediately? I mean, I believe Broner fought Maidana because of a fan vote, right? I believe fans wanted to see Broner fight Maidana the most. Do you see this rematch happening automatically, or do you see Broner kind of avoiding Maidana because he knows the kind of beating Maidana gave to him?
Yeah, I see him avoiding him for a little bit, man. I just don't see how he'd be able to do this. To be honest, Jay, I want Adrian Broner to move down a weight class. Let's not forget, the guy moved up 12 pounds to the welterweight weight class when he did move up. I would have loved to see a gradual movement. I think light welterweight, to be honest, is Adrian Broner's division. Because his fight against, let's say, Paul Malignaggi doesn't have power, but he gave, Adrian Broner, he gave him hell. The fight before that, he fought Gavin Reese for the WBC lightweight title. So then that is when he jumped up, 12 pounds. To be able to fight Malignaggi. Why not just move up to 140 pounds where he can probably, I wouldn't necessarily say dominate, but why not give that weight class a try? And I thought it was a big mistake when he did skip that weight class. But if he does move down to 140, Jay, guess who's waiting for him? Danny Garcia and Lucas Matisse.
Oof. Yeah, it doesn't get any easier. Before we preview UFC 168, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of issues. Number one, Mark Hunt fighting Antonio Bigfoot Silva. A lot of people are heralding this fight as one of the greatest heavyweight bouts of all time. Certainly a fight of the year candidate. And then the news comes out this week that Bigfoot failed his post-fight drug test. His elevated levels of testosterone suspended for about, 8 to 9 months. Did you catch this fight, Jorge? I know you were pretty busy the last couple of weeks. What were your thoughts on the fight if you saw it? And do you think this failed drug test taints that bout?
Well, luck may have it. I actually watched this fight right before we got on. And
oh, nice.
It was, as sloppy as it was, it had a lot of technique to it just because of how precise some of these guys' punches were. Despite the fact that they were in close quarters, it was a difficult fight to score, Jay. There could have been a couple of rounds that could have gone 10-8 for Hunt and 10-8 for Silva. Extremely difficult fight. For it to be a draw, I can't say that I was upset about it. And I know many people, that feel the same way. It was an incredible, test to both guys' will, and they both passed. I don't know, out of the two guys, it feels that Silva took such a beating when that was done, man.
Yeah, both men took a lot of punishment. Currently, Silva, he's serving a 9-month suspension, and he also had to give his $50,000 fight of the night bonus back. So Mark Hunt now makes $100,000. I'm sure he got way more than that from Dana White, the way he was talking.
Jay, one question for you.
Sure, yeah.
Mark Hunt is 9-8-1. Is that crazy to you?
No, that's the beauty of MMA, man. I just think, you take a look at Randy Couture. I mean, his record's not great either. Even, Brock Lesnar's fights, but it's just the impact that they have. I mean, it's just so weird because the logic's so backwards from boxing. Yeah. And it speaks to Mark Hunt's comeback. It's just amazing how this guy's career is finished. I mean, they took Mark Hunt's contract from Pride just because Mark Hunt begged him to keep fighting and earn his way. I mean, Dana White paid him to stay home and just stay at home and just get the money from his contract for free without earning it. And Mark Hunt wanted to fight his way through that contract, and he was very successful and revived his career. So it's just amazing, just an unbelievable chains of events from Mark Hunt. I mean, I was a huge fan of Mark Hunt back in the day in Pride and K1, so it was just cool to see him just rise in 2012 and 2013.
Quick question for you.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously, if Silva remains suspended, if this for some reason, or obviously likely not, going to be overturned, the ideal thing if he wasn't suspended would be to have a rematch maybe 4 or 5 months from now. Mark Hunt can't stay on the shelf for 9 months and wait for that rematch. So he's going to be forced to face someone else. Who is that going to be in that division, you think?
That's awfully tough, Jorge, because one thing, Mark Hunt's hurt himself. I think he damaged his hand. That's number one. Number two, you have Verdum, who stated that he's going to wait for Cain Velasquez to get healthy. So Velasquez, on all accounts, is out for the majority of 2014. You have Travis Brown fighting Josh Barnett. I mean, you have to really hope that neither guy gets hurt. I guess the winner of that fight would be fitting. Also, keep in mind, honestly, the turmoil in the heavyweight division helps also over in Frank Mir. I'd have to say 5 months ago, the losers probably cut from the UFC. Now, I don't really see that happening. They can't afford to cut either guy. They draw too much money, and they mean too much for the division, even if they suck. So I can see Mark Hunt fighting one of those guys, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and man, I don't know when we'll see him back. As you mentioned, everyone's busy in that division. If he faces maybe someone outside of the top 10, but I don't know. I think Mark Hunt is becoming, somewhat of a household name here, man, for a lot of these casual MMA fans. So you're going to have to put him against tough competition just because he obviously shows that he can bang.
Well, I mean, the way the injuries are turning out and you really don't have a clear number one contender, if Mark Hunt gets 2 victories, I can see him getting a title shot. It's very foreseeable. Let's discuss UFC 168. We're taking next week off, so obviously this is the biggest card of the year. 3 fights pretty much that are attracting most of the casual media attention. What I've heard, Weidman. Funny story about his name. Chris Weidman doesn't even know how to pronounce his own name. I heard in an interview that he heard it pronounced Weidman. It doesn't really matter. So I'm calling him Chris Weidman because I've heard everybody call him that. So that's his name to me. He's fighting Anderson Silva in one of the most anticipated rematches probably in the organization's history. This is for the middleweight title. We also, what happened the first time with Weidman and Silva. Silva showboated. Weidman knocked him out. What are your thoughts on this main event, Jorge, real quickly, because we have 2 other fights to break down. Do you see Silva taking this fight way more seriously, or do you see him kind of clowning around more?
That's how dramatic this fight is that our intro and outro music is kicking in, man. I'm going with Weidman again, to be honest, man. I think he has the ability to actually punk Silva around. Is Silva going to be able to be super technical with him? I don't think so. I don't know. I don't see how Silva is going to be able to do that. He's obviously taking this fight a lot more serious than he did, but to me, this fight is still a coin flip, and I'm going with the younger fighter.
Oh man, I don't know. I'm very conflicted as to who to pick here. I think just to be contrarian and just to think the great champion Anderson Silva has been, it might seem like I'm kind of kissing his butt a little bit, but I gotta pick Anderson Silva. I just think at his best, the way he moves in the octagon and avoids certain contact, I can see him making this extremely boring to win the title. I like Anderson Silva. I hope I'm wrong. I just don't see Anderson Silva staying in front of Chris Weidman for too long, and I see this Silva being a more technical striker. And to me, I think he hurts Weidman. I don't think he finishes him because I think Weidman might go for the takedown and might recover after Silva stuns him a little bit. But I like Silva in kind of a boring fight, man, a boring 5-round decision. I hope I'm wrong.
You don't think Chris Weidman would be able to cut off the cage?
I don't think so, man, because I think Anderson Silva underestimated Chris Weidman the first time. I don't think he took him too seriously, in my opinion.
So do you think Silva is willing to make this fight boring? Because I don't know if he is. I
do, yes. I don't know. He's done it before against guys that look at Damian Maia. He respected the heck out of him. He made that fight insanely boring. Now, granted, Damian Maia is nowhere near the wrestler or even the fighter Chris
exactly.
Weidman. But if Silva, if he wants to get a boring decision to get his title, he will. He doesn't care about pleasing the fans in terms of a fight being entertaining, in my opinion.
As far as this card also, it's just unbelievable how much they're marketing the women, man. You think that they were the main event and that one of the most anticipated rematches in the history of the sport wasn't even happening. It's just unbelievable to me. If Anderson Silva's that big of your name, obviously he's not American, Chris Weidman's not a well-known name, the name on this card is Ronda Rousey. But that fight, man, it's going to be a one-sided show, and I see Ronda having no issue with Miesha Tate and winning this in the first or second round again. She's gonna end it early. I mean, one of the sports books has her as high as a 10-1 favorite, dude.
I would take that bet, and I disagree.
You're crazy.
The first fight, Miesha Tate was stupid because she underestimated Ronda Rousey's submission attempts. She said it herself, Ronda Rousey won't submit me. And she just went right towards her, and Ronda Rousey submitted her. To me, I'm not sold on Ronda Rousey's hands yet. I don't think we've seen her throw maybe a couple of punches here or there. Her hands look good, hitting the mitts, but we have no clue what she has striking. And with Miesha Tate, she's a hell of a striker and a hell of a fighter. I don't see Miesha Tate really making the same mistake she did the first time. I get why you're picking Ronda Rousey, but to me, Ronda seems distracted. She seems kind of fueled by hate from Miesha Tate. You see every interview, she just gets, I don't know, she turns into a different person. I won't use curse words, but she just, I don't know. This woman drives Ronda Rousey nuts. This is a true rivalry. This is not made up for TV. These two women hate each other, especially Ronda Rousey hating Miesha Tate. I like the upset here. I'm going to go out on a limb. I like Miesha Tate to finish her by strikes. I don't think Miesha Tate's going to make the same mistake twice. If she does, I hope she never fights for the title again, because the first time I was just flabbergasted. I'm even in all of Ronda Rousey's fights, I'm just amazed why these women engage Ronda Rousey in the clinch. I have no idea why they do that. It's insane. Because the minute Ronda Rousey grabs you, the fight's over.
A little bit of breaking news for you,
sure.
Jay.
Yeah.
You're going 0-2 that night as far as your picks, man. I mean,
okay.
I just don't see. You have faith in Tate's hands. I have no faith in her takedown defense.
Fair enough. Good point.
I think she's going down, and Rousey's going to pull another armbar.
You could be right. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it's highly likely. Something's just weird about this fight, man. I just don't see Miesha Tate making the same mistake twice, and I'm not sold on Ronda Rousey's hands yet.
Neither
sooner
am I.
or later,
I'll give you that.
It's going to catch up to you, and I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong, and we could see Miesha Tate just go and clinch her, and the fight could be over.
Yeah, and here's two things. The reason I don't think the Ronda Rousey Holly Holm fight will ever happen is because of two things. Kat Zingano, whenever she comes back, I think is going to be Ronda Rousey. The next person in line, who might be the first one, I think Sarah McMahon would wipe Ronda Rousey out, man.
Wow. Huh.
Those two fights, pose the biggest threat to her. So as far as Miesha Tate, I think Ronda Rousey, even if she is overlooking her here, and obviously she's not because she's been put in front of her like maybe 40, 50 times before the fight. And that's got to do something to you too, Jay. When you see this person that you absolutely hate and are disgusted by, I think the same thing from that. I mean, the way you feel Misha feels about Ronda, I think it's times 3 for Ronda. She's just disgusted with her and doesn't feel that Misha Tate belongs on the same level, I don't think. So,
yeah.
So Misha Tate out, bring on Kat or Sarah McMahon.
We'll see. I think it's going to be highly entertaining. I think for sure this is the most highly anticipated UFC, end of the year card we've seen in quite a while. And it's really good to see kind of MMA end off on such a high note. We've seen in the past injuries just ruin cards, and I'm glad this card stayed together. I think we all reminisce about the old Pride Final Countdown cards, at the end of December. I think this card is fitting of that distinction. I want to discuss Josh Barnett, Travis Brown real quickly. Travis Brown, was brought into the cage at the Holly Holm fight card a couple of weeks ago, trying to push his stardom. Certainly this is the biggest fight of his career, taking on a very game and dangerous Josh Barnett. How do you see this fight going down?
I think Barnett stops him probably in the second. I mean, I'd love to see Travis Brown pull this off just because, the freak injury that he had in one of his fights recently. But, I mean, Josh, just an old school veteran. They have when they dirty box, they have a pretty similar dirty boxing style. But I think Barnett's just going to pull some old school stuff on him and outsmart him, I think. And I see Josh Barnett winning this.
I agree with you. I think this is going to be a great learning experience for Travis Brown. I think he's pretty tough mentally to not let this fight ruin him if he loses. So I can really see him learning quite a ton from Barnett, which I agree with you, Jorge. I think it's going to use a lot of, the veteran kind of moves on him to get the victory. And I can see him submitting Brown with one of his old school catch wrestling submissions. Diego Brandao taking on Dustin the Diamond Poirier. A big step up in competition despite Dustin Poirier kind of struggling as of late. Diego Brandao trains at Jackson's MMA, won the Ultimate Fighter. What do you think of this fight? Brandao, very explosive, but has been known to kind of gas at certain occasions. What do you make of this fight?
I'm not the biggest Dustin Poirier fan, to be honest. You said he struggled. He lost to Brandao's a teammate, Cub Swanson, a couple of fights ago. Diego needs a big win. He needs a huge win, and I think a knockout victory over Dustin will actually do that for him. So, I know it's a little bit of an upset, but I'm going Diego Brandao by stoppage.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot of faith in Brandao.
It is, and he's never been stopped, and Dustin Poirier has never been stopped. So I'm going out on a pretty big limb there.
We'll see. Yeah, I think I don't know. Brandao's conditioning concerns me, but I agree with you, Jorge. Brandao's probably a more explosive fighter. But this would be contrarian again. I think I'll take Dustin Poirier, but wouldn't surprise me to see Brandao take it.
You're going 1-3, my friend.
We'll see. 2 weeks away. Also this weekend, before we get to UFC 168, is Glory 13. Takes place actually tomorrow night. And you can catch the live feed on BloodyElbow.com and SpikeTV.com, and then the tape portion will come on Saturday night. There's a great card there. I believe that's going to wrap up our show, Jorge. Anything else you wanted to discuss? You've been out about 2 weeks. Anything you want to get off your chest before we say goodbye this week?
Very quick story. So after the press conferences at the Barclays Center for the boxing event that took place were led by Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins did a decent job of of introducing the fighters and laying everyone. He did have his little his some of his problems remembering some of the fighters' names, but nonetheless he did a decent job. But one quick story about him. There were a bunch of the reporters and photographers just hanging out. He was just hanging out on stage. He immediately jumped off and kind of moved a couple of people out of the way. He picked up a nickel off the ground and put it in his pocket. Everyone looked at him like, you're Bernard Hopkins, man. You make $300,000 a fight. We all looked at him, and he turns out to all of us. He looks right at me, and he points to me, and he's like, listen. He's like, the next time I'm a nickel short of the dollar, as they say, I won't be. He's like, you never forget. He tells me, and he looked at me straight in the eye. He's like, you never forget where you come from. He's like, because anyone else, someone out in the streets, they would die for that nickel. He's like, so I'm not going to remember. He's like, I'm going to remember where I come from. So the streets of Philly were no joke, man. Put the nickel in his pocket and walked away, man.
Wow. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, the charisma and kind of his just old school vibe that he has. And hopefully if he crosses over into commentating, I hope that carries over into the announce booth, because I think with some polish and some time, he'd be really good at it.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. I mean, and there's a little more to that story, but that's all we had time for. But nonetheless, it's great to see how humble of a guy he still is.
Absolutely. So again, you get in touch with The Low Blow on Fight Fans Radio, Southwest Fight, USCombatSports.com. Follow Fight Fans Radio on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Spreaker. Also, follow all of Jorge's videos on YouTube, youtube.com/Lobo505. We're getting cut out here. So for Jorge Hernandez, I'm Justin Goodrum. We'll see you next week.
Peace.